Okay. Okay, folks, good evening and welcome back. Last time we spoke, last time we had a class, we left off towards the end of the first tikkun in Tikunei Zohar, which is what we're doing now. We're studying some of the sections of the Tikunei Zohar. We might do all of them, we'll see how it goes. But the first tikkun in Tikunei Zohar, first of all, the word tikkun itself. What does the word tikkun mean? The word tikkun, as we explained last time, means both rectification and it also means a garment. If you want to see the explanation or hear the explanation again, go back to last week's video, the first video on tikkun, on the tikkunim, and there we explained it in greater detail. In any event, these two ideas are related, that the garment and the rectification are basically two sides of the same coin, because as the first tikkun in Tikunei Zohar tells us, our entire task in this world is really to make a vessel, to make a kli, a receptacle for godliness in the world. Now, what does this mean? So we started off explaining that the word Bereshit, the first word of the Bible, the first word of the book of Genesis, the word Bereshit, is what the Tikunei Zohar is about. It discusses 70 different permutations of that word, the word Bereshit. And the first permutation was Beit Reshit. Let me just get this up. One second here. Let me just get this on the board, on the computer, so you can see it. Here we go. The word Bereshit. Make that a bit bigger. Okay. That's the word Bereshit in the beginning, which the Zohar explains as Bet Reshit. There are really two beginnings. That's going to be the end of the explanation. But this word Bet in Hebrew, which means two, is when it's spelled out in full, and I'm going to spell it out here, is spelled like this: Bayit, a house, a residence for the beginning. And that's essentially what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be making a residence for he who begins it all, for God. That's what the concept is all about. And that's what we started discussing. And that is what is called in the classic literature, or at least modern classic literature, that's what's called tikkun olam, the rectification of the world. The rectification of the world does not mean destroying the world in order to create it in our own image, which has been the preferred methodology of dictators and world emperors, like like Napoleon and many others, Caligula, many others in history, but rather to make the world a place where the divine image can be revealed in all of us, where it is naturally, and in the world as a whole. But in order to achieve this, so we have to become, as the Tikkun said, the first Tikkun in Tikunei Zohar said, we had to become a Merkava. Merkava means like a chariot. A chariot doesn't have a will of its own. It doesn't go where it's not guided by artificial intelligence. The chariot goes where the rider wants it to go. Now, the whole concept of Merkava is, as I think I explained in previous classes, Merkava mysticism is an entire branch of Jewish thought. It's called Merkava mysticism. An entire branch of Jewish thought. And that concept of Merkava, as we explained, was from the word laharkiv, to put things together. To put things together. In other words, to amalgamate things, to unify things, to bring things into a state of oneness. To put things together so that they become one. 1 second, let me just get the chat up here because there's some questions. Oh, okay, no questions. Okay, so that is what we have discussed up until now. And tonight we're going to continue with this whole concept of tikkun olam, rectifying the world, and what it has to do with the nation which was called Amalek, the Amalekites. All right, let me just find it over here. Yeah, this is the section of the Zohar that discusses it. Previously, up here, previously in, oh yeah, you can see it. Yeah, up previously in the previous discussion, we spoke about, or the Zohar rather speaks about. We didn't discuss it much, but the Zohar speaks about that which prevents anything from becoming this receptacle that it needs to become. What is it that prevents things from becoming the proper receptacle for godliness? In other words, the proper vessel by which the divine image is revealed, whether it's a person, whether it's a situation, whether it's an object, whatever it may happen to be. So the Zohar discusses this and said really that we can dub this or call it, refer to it as what is called Amalek, the tribe of Amalek. Now, let me just get this document up over here where you can see the word Amalek. Right, so Amalek in Hebrew is spelled this way, Ayin Mem Lamed Kuf. Now, a very important device in Kabbalah, which can be overused, unfortunately. I personally try not to overuse it. I'm not a great fan of what's called gematria, numerical values of things, but they are sometimes useful or often useful if they're not overused in understanding certain connections. One of the ways in which gematria works, each letter in Hebrew has a numerical value. For instance, the numerical value of that letter, which is called ayin, is 70. The numerical value of mem is 40. The numerical value of lamed is 30. And the numerical value of kuf is 100. So if you go 130 plus 70, right, that's 130 here, 130 here, plus 70, plus 70, it's 200, plus 40 equals 240, right? That's 240. Now, that word, that gematria also spells the word safek. Samach is 60, pei is 80, kuf is 100. So it's 180 plus 60, which is 240, right? 240. So in other words, there is a excuse me, there's a connection between these two things, between Amalek and the word Safek. What does Safek mean? Safek means doubt. And primarily in the context that we're going to be talking about it means self-doubt. When does a person start to lose the ability to rectify anything. It's not that he doesn't have the opportunity, he or she obviously doesn't have the opportunity. It's that they don't seize the opportunity because they don't believe that they can make any difference. They don't believe they can make a difference. That's the concept of Amalek. What does Amalek do? He prevents you. We're obviously talking about in a figurative sense. The power of Amalek is to arouse doubts in your mind that you have any ability to change things, and you have any ability to make a decision and stick with it. You doubt your own abilities, you doubt your own powers, you doubt your own wisdom to a very large extent. Oh, you're not getting it on the screen because I stopped sharing the screen. That was foolish of me. I'm sorry. Let me share the screen again. Someone should have pointed it out to me. Okay. There is the word Amalek, 70, and the word that's the letter. That letter has the numerical value of 70, 40, 30, 100 equals 240. Similarly, 60, 80, 100 equals 240. So Amalek and Sofek, Amalek and doubt, self-doubt in particular, are connected. They're connected numerically, but that's only the most outward aspect of their connection. The inward aspect of the connection is actually found much more clearly in what the Zohar is going to say now. We have been talking about the Merkava. The Merkava is, so to speak, the chariot on which is a throne, the throne of God, so to speak. And again, this is all imagery, which is not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be understood conceptually. Now, regarding this, the throne of God on the chariot, regarding the throne of God, it says as follows. Vayomer, this is what actually in the verse, let me just give you the context of the verse, 1 second. The context of the verse is as follows. We're talking about the time when Amalek came and battled against, Amalek is a nation again, they came and did battle against the Israelites in Rephidim. The word Rephidim is an interesting word. It's the name of a place, but why was it called Rephidim? So let me just get that document up again and I'll explain this to you a little bit more graphically. You'll be able to see it. It's called Rephidim. Let me do it in English. Rephidim. It's Rephidim because Raphe, Yedehem. Because their hands became weak. Their grip on things became weak. The grip of who? The grip of the Israelites on reality, on who they were and what their mission was, became weak. So the word Rephidim comes from the word Rafeh Yedehem. In Hebrew, you can do this. If you look at the word actually in Hebrew, let's just write the word in Hebrew and you'll see what I mean. Rephidim. See, that's Rafeh. Let's get back there. That's Rafeh. Yedehem. Right, so we have, 1 second, I'm sorry. Okay, let's get it over there. So you have the Reish over here, the Pei, and then Yedehem spells Rephidim, except that the Hay is left out. Rafei Yedehem. So we have, therefore, the concept of they became weak. Their strength became weak. They became weak-handed, so to speak. In other words, they lost their faith in themselves. Now, they lost their faith in God first, and that's exactly what happens because of the concept conceptually because of Amalek. And this is what the Zohar comes to tell us. Vayomer. So again, this is the context that we're talking about, and this actual verse states as follows. I'll just read the English. Oops, sorry, I skipped the chapter here. I'm just going to get back to it again. Here we go. It's talking about when Moses fought against, when the Jewish people the Israelites were fighting against Amalek, and it says like this, that Moses went up a mountain. They ascended to the top of the hill. Moses and Aaron and Hur, that was the descendant of Aaron. So it happened that when Moses raised his hand, Israel was stronger, and when he lowered his hand, Amalek was stronger. Moses' hands grew heavy. So it took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on this side and one on that side, etc. And then God says to Moses as follows, write this as a remembrance in the book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I shall surely erase the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Moses built an altar and called his name, God is my miracle, etc. And he said, this is what Moses said, for the hand is on the throne of God. God maintains a war against Amalek from generation to generation. That's the context. Now in Hebrew, it's written as follows. Vayomer, and he said, there is a hand upon the throne of God. Now, what is telling about these words? Well, what he's telling is as follows, that the word throne usually should have another letter following it. It should be written as kisei with an aleph afterwards, with a letter aleph afterwards, and the name that is used here is only half of the divine name. That the half of the full divine name is Yud Hey Vav Hey, but it's only written here as Yud Hey. So the sages say about this that the throne is not complete and the name is not complete until Amalek has been destroyed, until this concept of Amalek has been destroyed. Now, why is this important? Let's explain here what we mean. Because what are the letters that are missing again? The letters that are missing here are the following letters. These letters here. Let me just make them a little bit bigger so that you can see it more clearly. Here we go. Okay. Here, these are the letters that are missing. The aleph from the word kisei, and the vav k from the divine name, which should be Yud Hey Vav Hey. All right, so this word here in Hebrew actually spells an important word. The letters, these three letters actually spell an important word. The word Iva. Iva means he desired, he wanted, he longed for. And it's talking, there's a verse in Psalms that says, Iva lemoshav lo. He desired a place in which to dwell, a place in which to sit for himself. That's talking about God. God desired a place in which to sit for himself, so to speak. In other words, a place to be settled. That's what it means. God desired a manner in which he would be settled in the world, which means that the divine presence would be felt constantly and everywhere in the world. So this word, Iva, designates that whole concept. And that is the danger of Amalek. The danger of Amalek is, again, that he prevents this from happening. His hand is preventing this, the throne from being complete and the name from being complete. In other words, the divine presence from being seated, so to speak. Again, it's all meant figuratively, from being seated in the world, from having a firm, solid foundation in the world. So therefore, what is the tikkun olam? What does it mean to rectify the world, to do tikkun olam. What is this all about? Now, I know that you'll find probably in many different places, people are trying to sell you the concept of tikkun olam and what exactly it means, and what it's there for, and what you're supposed to do. Ultimately, it seems to me, the whole concept of tikkun olam is exactly what we have been talking about now. The idea of making our lives and our surroundings and the people around us places in which godliness can be revealed. There's nothing more important, and in fact probably nothing more satisfying for yourself and for the recipient thereof than having an experience, a divine experience, an experience of the divine. Now, there's a book, I think it's called To Touch the Divine. I didn't read the book, but the title is a fantastic title, To Touch the Divine. To touch the divine, or to be touched by the divine one, by God. To be touched by God, or to touch God, is really essentially what the whole concept of tikkun olam is all about. And then the entire concept of what he then goes on to talk about, what the Tikunei Zohar then goes on to talk about, the concept of galut. Galut means exile. The whole concept of galut, of exile, is then done away with. It's removed. Because what is exile? When we talk about exile, exile means primarily the exile of the divine presence. Galut HaShekhinah, the exile of the divine presence. Now, there's some interesting stories about this. One of the most famous Kabbalists in recent times. In other words, when I say recent times, I don't mean in the last in the last 100 years or so. We're talking about in the last 500 years. Moshe Cordovero, the Ramak, the author of the Paradise. So the author of the Paradise, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, lived in the 1500s, before the time of the Arizal. The Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, was actually his successor. Dennis, I'll get your question in a second. So the Rabbi Moshe Cordovero wrote a book called Sefer Girushin, the book of exile of I guess of exiles, of the book of exile, or the book of being chased out from one place to another. But the book of banishment, I suppose, is a better title. Sefer Girushin, where he describes a sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a penance, but a kind of a rectification that he took upon himself with various other people together, some of his students, to attempt to understand what the situation of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, was, what it means to be banished from the world. And so he and his disciples went into a state of exile where they wouldn't stay in one place for more than a day. In other words, they would arrive in a place, they would stay the rest of the day and the night, and they would leave the next morning. And they moved from place to place, and they did this for a year. I think it was a year. It could have been, it was longer than that, but I think they did it for a whole year. And then they got to understand what being unsettled means. Now, I know there's many people who've experienced this kind of thing, refugees of one sort or another, who have been through these travails, and it's something certainly to sympathize with. And I'm not suggesting that this is something that should be done in our day, but Rabbi Moshe Cordovero wanted to do it because he wanted to understand, in order to be able to understand what it is that he had to do, and the vital importance of what it is that he had to do. He felt that he had to understand the position that the divine presence was in. Okay, so that is what galut, exile, is all about. Exile means the exile of the divine presence. And the exile of the divine presence is a general thing, and it's also a specific thing, a personal thing, which I'll get to in a second. Let me just answer a question here. The place we create for God to settle in this world is being that right vessel for his work in the world. Yes, exactly, Dennis. That's exactly correct. That's exactly right. Okay, so what is this personal sense of inviting the divine presence back from the exile into us? So this is what the verse continues. He quotes a verse from the Song of Songs. Now, interestingly enough, the Song of Songs, why is it called the Song of Songs? Because the Song of Songs is a book that was written, a holy work that was written by King Solomon. He called it the Song of Songs. So why did he call it the Song of Songs? And one of the explanations that's given, an interesting explanation, is it's the song that the songs themselves sing. Now I'll tell you an interesting story that that sort of will illustrate this idea a little bit. There was a very famous Hasidic rabbi of a Hasidic sect. Although sect is a terrible word, but a Hasidic dynasty, let's put it that way. Sect is not a good word. And his name was Rabbi Tikunei Zohar of Liadi. He was the student of the successor. He was one of the primary students, perhaps the primary student of the Maggid Mezrich. Maggid was the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, the appointed successor to the Baal Shem Tov, and Rabbi Tikunei Zohar of Liadi was one of his star disciples. So the story is told about Rabbi Tikunei. There was a tremendous opposition at that time to Hasidic teachings, to the Hasidic way, and the reason for it was that the rank and file, or let's put it this way, the establishment, the establishment rabbis at that time, the establishment rabbis wanted things to continue to be done in the way that had always been done, or the way that they felt had always been done. And there was no need for change, and change can only lead to ultimately changing the religion into something that it's not. And that's what their worry was. But their worries were completely unfounded, as we see today, that the most pious and the most observant are really the Hasidim, the followers of the followers of the followers of the Baal Shem Tov. But in any event, at this particular time, there was tremendous animosity between the two groups, the establishment and the upstarts, as they called them, right? The establishments and the upstarts. So the upstart, one of the leaders of the upstart movement, so to speak, was Rabbi Tikunei Zohar of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, as he's sometimes called, the author of the Tanya and many, many other works. The Tanya is just a famous book that many people have heard of. In any event, Rabbi Tikunei Zohar of Liadi once gave as he was famous for doing, he gave a sort of a mystical interpretation of a legal ruling. Now, the legal rulings are usually read sort of point blank. In other words, you read them as they are on the face, and that's what they mean. This legal ruling had to do with the Sabbath, and one of the rules of the Sabbath is that a person is obligated to rest on the Sabbath. Now, when we say rest on the Sabbath, it means not doing 39 types of work. It doesn't mean only going to work, but it even means things like lighting fires, building, sewing, all kinds of things like that. There has to be a complete cessation of work, and one has to turn inwards and cultivate one's spirituality at least one day of the week. And that has to be done with precision. In other words, It's not just a suggestion that you're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to work, and there's 39 categories of work. I don't want to go into them all. It's not the place for them. But in any event, many things that we would not consider work today would not be allowed. Like, for instance, even talking on a phone or watching television, things like that would not be allowed. Okay, so, or at least switching on the television, switching on lights, and so on. In any event, this teaching in the Mishnaic teachings are like the rudimentary, basic statement of the law. And this law says as follows. First of all, I had to explain another thing. Not only are you obligated to rest, but even your animals are obligated to rest on the Sabbath. You're not allowed to work your animals on the Sabbath. And one of these laws that deals with it is in this particular Mishnah, in this particular rabbinic teaching that says like this. I'll paraphrase it first, that animals who wear a chain, let's say wear a chain to pull a plow or to pull a wagon or something like that, any animal that wears a chain may not go out in the public domain wearing that chain. Right? The animal may not go out wearing the chain because that's seen as somehow, even if the animal's not doing any work, but it's carrying the chain around its neck, whatever. So the Hebrew for this is called Bale Hasher. Let me just write that down so you can see it. Make it easier for you. Called Bale Hasher. That's how you spell it. Except that it's spelled in the following way. Kol Bale Asher. Where are we here? Kol Bale Asher. Oh, another thing I have to do. Kol Bale Asher. Right? Asher is a sharsheret, a chain. Any animal carrying a chain, again, we're looking at this word here. Any animal carrying a chain is not allowed to go out wearing that chain on the Sabbath. So, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi explain. Oh, screen share. I'm not good at this. Okay. Sorry about that. Here we are. That's the word I'm talking about. Share, right? That's the word for chain. So, Kol Bale Hasher, any animal which wears a chain is not allowed to go out with that chain on the Sabbath. Right? If any work is involved. However, the Mishnah states the following. If the chain is worn in a sense like a garment, in other words, the animal is so used to it, it's not just a chain that is put on it when it has to pull a plow or pull a wagon or something like that, pull a heavy load, but this chain is worn all the time. Like you will often find, for example, that cows have a chain with a bell around their necks and things like that. I'm not talking about the bell necessarily, but a chain around their neck like that, so that it becomes sort of part of their, they don't feel it anymore. It's not work for them because it's just like when you go out with a belt, you don't feel that you're carrying anything. It's part of your attire. That's the way you walk out. So it says like this: Kol Bale Hasher, all those animals that have a chain, Yotzim B'Sher may, if the chain is like a garment to a human being, in other words, they're so used to it that it's not regarded as a burden, then they may go out with a chain and they may be even drawn along with the chain. In other words, if you're leading the animal, you may draw it along with its chain. You may pull it with its chain, by its chain. Okay. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi changed this slightly, and he said like this: Kol Bale Hashir, and that's spelled slightly differently, spelled like that. Instead of two dots under this letter here, these two dots here, it only has one dot, and it's pronounced differently because the vowels are underneath and in the middle of the vowels and the letters are different in Hebrew. In English, the vowels and the letters are the same thing. You know, some letters are vowels and some letters are consonants. In Hebrew, it's not like that. So he translated it as follows: all the masters of song, because the word shir, instead of meaning chain when it's pronounced share, when you pronounce it shir, it means all masters of song. All the masters of song can be pulled along. They go out with their song and they can be pulled along with their song. That's the way he explained it. Well, when the word of this explanation got out to the opponents of the Hasidic way, they were absolutely furious, and they said, you cannot, under any circumstances, explain a legal ruling as homiletically in that kind of a way. What did he mean? He said his explanation was that people who are endowed, all human beings initially at least, are endowed with an animal soul as well as a human soul. We have an animal soul, that's the animalistic part of ourselves, and then we have the human part of ourselves. So everyone has these two aspects, unless one becomes a saintly person, a tzaddik, who manages to get rid of the animal soul, or at least convert it to a human soul. So he has two human souls, so to speak. In any event, so he was saying like this: how do you get rid of your animal soul? Through song, through singing this animal soul, through singing heartfelt, deep, inspiring songs. The animal becomes elevated to the level of human, called Bala Hasher. Don't read it as share, but shir. And all the masters of song can pull themselves along with a song, can exit themselves with a song. They can get into a state of ecstasy and pull themselves along higher with their song. Okay. Let's cause an uproar, as I mentioned. And sometime later, several months later, Rabbi Schneider Zalman was traveling, and he arrived in a place where they recognized his greatness in scholarship, although they were still very suspicious of him. So they wanted to test him and hopefully, in their opinion, refute his way of doing things and bring him back to the way of truth. That's what they were intending to do. So, what did they do? They gave him a slot, so to speak, where all of the sages of that particular city, and there were many, many, many very, very great scholars, would challenge him. And he said, that's fine, but, you know, send in all your questions at once, send in all your questions beforehand, so that I'll be able to address them all in one, instead of having people ask one question, another question, whatever, I'll address all the questions together. And so they all sent him in their questions. And on that Sabbath, he went into the synagogue, which was packed to the brim. And he said the following. All those animals that carry a chain can go out with a chain and be drawn out with that chain on the Sabbath, as long as it's part of the, so to speak, like a garment. Don't read it as chain, share, read it as shear. All masters of song, and he repeated exactly the teaching that had made them furious. And then he said, so instead of answering your question, I'm going to sing a song. And he apparently had a beautiful voice, and he was a master of song, of nigun. And he sang the song that afterwards someone who was there, who was a bitter opponent of his, actually became one of his disciples as a result of this song. And he called it the song of the giving of the Torah, the song that not commemorates, but is an instance of, an example of the giving of the Torah. Why? Because during that song, it was so melodious and so deep and so uplifting that everyone listening was lifted up to a higher place, and their questions were answered automatically. The questions were answered automatically. He didn't have to answer the questions. The question became answered sort of automatically because they were in a higher spiritual place. So that's what that's why this is a digression, by the way, just to explain. Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. Okay, so the Song of Songs says like this: Simeni kechotem al libecha, place me as a sign upon your heart, and we will place you as a sign upon our heart, and that way we will always be together. Basically, the idea is, as the Zohar goes on to say, the seal, the sign of God is the Shekhinah, and as long as we have in our consciousness this idea of revealing godliness in the world, then the seal of God is upon our hearts, right? The seal of God is upon our hearts, and our seal is upon his heart, so to speak. And ultimately that therefore leads to the situation which we would call the opposite of exile, the time of redemption. The time of redemption is when we will be able to see clearly that everything is in fact godliness. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. Okay, let me address a couple of questions. Annie had a question. This question at the end of the lecture. If there is none other, exactly fits in with what we just said. Why is the Creator at war with himself? No, he's not at war with himself. I think that's the wrong way to put it. The Creator is not at war with himself. I think that you would put it as follows. The Creator makes a situation where we have to do our part. The first section of the Torah, the first section of the Bible, right at the end of creation, at the end of the sixth day of creation, it says as follows. At the end of that, it says that God created everything to do. Asher bara Elokim la'asot. God created everything to do, and the word la'asot is translated in the Aramaic translation, Targum Onkelos, as litaken, to rectify. God created things to rectify, to be rectified, that we would rectify. If everything is given to you on a plate, and you probably know this from your children, if you do everything for them, they don't understand the value of anything. They just simply don't understand the value of anything. If everything is done for a person, everything is done, you basically become just to a very large extent, I would say, not only an ingrate and ungrateful person, but also a person who simply is completely unaware of what it is that's being done. It's like expectation. We expect it, You see youth today, and I can say because I have a white beard, and I've been a teacher for many, many years, a teacher of youth, by the way, of young people as well as older people. But you see today, there's sort of just almost an expectation that, of course, you're going to give me whatever it is that I want. Of course, whatever it is that I want is going to be handed to me on a golden platter. It's a very sad state of affairs. Let's just take an example. Someone like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, some of the great painters, some of the great artists in the world. I can almost guarantee that if I get a sophisticated enough camera and I take a picture of one of Michelangelo's famous works or one of Leonardo da Vinci's famous works, I can make an exact replica that looks perfect in every detail. What's it lacking? Why is it worth more or less the paper on which it's printed? because there was no effort put into it. It's not the real thing. It's just it's a copy. It's not real. Only when effort is put into something, when something of you is in what it is that you do, as our sages say, they say, it's an expression I think that actually comes from the Hebrew lip service. It comes from the lips and outwards. Yeah, in other words, yeah, it's a declaration. Yeah, I mean, of course, I am that, I do that, or whatever. But unless there's real work behind it, it's really useless. It doesn't do what it claims to do. So that's why I think let's not make the mistake. Tikkun means putting the work in, and sometimes it's hours and hours and days and essentially a lifetime of work, and we may not always see the fruits thereof. We may not see them immediately. We may not even see them after a very long time, but eventually we will see the fruits. One of the concepts of the redemption is that we'll see the fruits all of a sudden in front of us without even realizing that we were looking at it all the time. It was right under our noses. Okay. Yael says, I was unaware of the story, but I've used this price went to general surgery. I feel the need to hum and nigun prior to surgery went under, I guess, still singing. I woke up 7 hours after surgery, still humming that song, that nigun. Nigun is a song. My surgeon was shocked and in amazement because I only needed light Tylenol post-surgery. Well, there you go. That is fantastic. That is a beautiful story. Oh, liquid Tylenol. Yeah, it's a beautiful story. It's fantastic. Really, really inspiring because, yes, song has the ability to do that. And people who are naturally singers, and there are some people who are like that. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them, but there are people who are like that. And I think life for them is a spiritual experience as long as they're singing. It's a wonderful thing. I hope my cough goes away. Yeah, it's wintertime, you know. Actually, talking about next week, I'm not sure that there is going to be a class next week. I think that there's not going to be a class next week. If I'm not mistaken, I think there's actually Thanksgiving next week. Am I right? Yeah. Yes, it is. Okay, so you know what? I don't want to interfere with your Thanksgiving. I think giving thanks is a wonderful thing. Make sure that you do it. And it doesn't have to be only thanks in a political sense. It can be thanks in a spiritual sense. It can be thanks in a family sense. Gratitude is a good attitude. Yeah, an attitude of gratitude is a wonderful thing. And so let's not have a class next week. And he says, didn't they go to war with Amalek? Yes, but Amalek represents the opposite. Amalek represents the idea of God not being in the world. Amalek is a force that tries to push godliness away from the world and away from a person's individual consciousness. And that's why we had to destroy him. That's why we had to fight against him. Yes, as a Canadian, we had our Thanksgiving over a month ago. Right. Good. Alrighty. Wendy. I work with troubled children. Yes, I know that. Also, they won't talk about what's wrong. In fact, I will not talk about anything. So I suggest we sing. When we do observe that the singing gets the energy moving within them, the kids loosen up and get them talking. Interesting. I never thought about that. That's a very interesting thing. I wonder if anyone has ever done any studies on autistic children and singing. That would be a pretty fascinating study if singing has an effect on autism. If anyone knows about that, I'd like to hear about it, if you don't mind. Again, my email address, which is kabbalahdecoded@gmail.com, is you can always write and ask questions or send me things that you think are interesting and that I might be interested in also. I would be delighted if someone knows about autism and song and can point me to some sources, perhaps. Would be really wonderful. Okay. Oh, thank you, Hank. Thanks very much. I missed one of your questions. Oh, sorry about that. Which question was that? Oh, here we go. How can anything prevent the creator from anything in this world? In other words, how can we prevent the creator's presence if he decides to be present? Yeah, he decides to be present only when we invite him in. He doesn't decide to be present by his agency, but by our invitation, by our hard work. It's not just the invitation. Invitation is just the beginning. It has to be our own hard work. Why is that so? So that we don't have what's called nama de kisufa. Nama de kisufa means bread of shame. You don't get it for nothing. When you get something for nothing, you don't appreciate it. That's the reason. Found sound therapist in Sedona. I imagine that's California. Am I right? No, Sedona is Colorado, Arizona. Sedona. I want to take the class, not song, but frequencies. Interesting. Okay. Sounds good. All right. My experience was beyond normal singing. Autism, it should work based on the spiritual aspect of autism. Yeah, I'd like to see if there's any studies on it. I'd be very fascinated to find out. Okay, folks. I think Terry, maybe you would know about it since you're a psychologist. Maybe you could find out or ask around or something like that. I'd be very interested to hear such a thing. It might be very useful to a number of people. All right, all the best. Shabbat shalom. And folks, have a great and inspiring Thanksgiving. Make sure to give thanks to those around you, to give thanks to those who put their lives on the line every day, which means people in the medical field, nurses, doctors, firemen, policemen, army people, and so on and so forth. You may not agree with their politics. You may, yes, agree with their politics, but that's not the point. Gratitude for the hard work that they put in and for the risks that they take on our behalf. And of course, over and above everything, family, and over and above that, even God. But don't finish it. Don't just start with God and finish there. You have to express it to your family, to your friends, to your co-workers, and so on and so forth. Okay, all the best then, and have a great time. We'll see you next time around.